Welcome back to Empowering Your Finance. Today we're doing a deep dive into student loan debt, specifically focusing on a big question. Is student loan garnishment resuming in 2025?
That's right. It's a topic causing a lot of anxiety, and understandably so.
For about 5 years now, we've had this pause on federal student loan collections put in place because of the pandemic. It gave a lot of people some breathing room.
Definitely. But that period is officially coming to an end.
And the date we need to know is May 5th, 2025. That's when the Department of Education plans to restart collection efforts.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're going to break down what that really means for you, especially if you've maybe defaulted on your loans or you're worried you might be at risk.
We'll cover the timeline, the reasons behind this change, what you can expect to happen.
And maybe most importantly, what options are actually available to protect yourself financially.
Because this isn't a small issue, is it? The numbers are just staggering.
They really are. Over $1.6 trillion in federal student loan debt.
Held by, what, 42.7 million borrowers?
Yeah, almost 23 million people. It touches a huge part of the U.S. population.
Okay, so let's get into the details. The pause started March 2020. The restart date is May 5th, 2025. What happens between now and then or right after?
Well, the plan is for 30-day advance notices to be sent out to borrowers who are affected, so you should get a heads up.
A warning, basically.
Right. And then the first actual involuntary collections, the ones using the Treasury Department's offset program, that's expected probably around June 2025.
An offset program means they can take things like your tax refund?
Exactly. Tax refunds, potentially Social Security benefits, wage garnishment later on. That's the mechanism.
Okay. And this is all happening against that backdrop of, $1.6 trillion in debt, nearly 43 million borrowers. Attempts at broad forgiveness didn't quite pan out legally.
Correct. Those faced significant court challenges. And it's interesting that current Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, has also been calling for reform in higher ed financing itself, has kind of focusing on transparency, accountability from universities regarding costs. It hints at maybe a longer-term shift in how the government approaches this whole issue.
Now, looking at who's most vulnerable right now, the default numbers are pretty scary.
They are. Estimates are around 5.3 million borrowers currently in default. That's a lot of people.
And on top of that, another 4 million or so are delinquent, meaning late on payments.
And some data, I think from the New York Fed, suggested maybe 10 million borrowers fell behind after the payment pause ended last year. It's a precarious situation for many.
And are there specific groups expected to be hit harder by this resumption?
Unfortunately, yes. The data points towards those already facing financial struggles, folks below the poverty line, for instance. And studies often show women carry more debt relative to earnings.
And for those in default, that threat of wage garnishment, up to 15% without even needing a court order, that's significant.
It really is. Which naturally leads to the question, why now? Why resume collections at this point?
Right. What's the official reasoning?
A big part of the stated rationale is relieving the burden on taxpayers. The idea is when federal loans aren't repaid, the cost ultimately falls on taxpayers.
So using the Treasury offset program to recoup funds is framed as fiscal responsibility.
Pretty much. Recovering outstanding debt, making the system more, well, sustainable financially. That's the argument.
And we also touched on Secretary McMahon's position regarding loan forgiveness.
Yes, her stance is quite clear. She believes the executive branch doesn't have the authority for that kind of broad, sweeping loan cancellation.
Which is a different approach than we saw previously.
Definitely. It marks a shift, emphasizing constitutional boundaries, as she sees them, regarding debt and spending power. It moves towards a more individual responsibility model for the debt.
And wasn't there also something from Congress?
Yes, good point. Back in October 2023, Congress actually mandated the resumption of normal loan collection activities.
Ah, okay. So that followed the Supreme Court ruling against the Biden administration's debt relief plan.
Exactly. So now there's a legislative directive essentially pushing this forward, too.
Okay, so timeline, reasons. Let's get practical. What should borrowers actually expect to see happen? That Treasury offset program, TOP, coming back.
Right. This is key for anyone in default, which usually means being about a year behind on payments. Starting May 5th, 2025, involuntary collections can restart.
And that includes
Garnishing federal tax refunds, potentially offsetting Social Security payments, and then wage garnishment, which is expected a bit later, maybe summer 2025.
And people will get letters about this.
Yes, the Treasury Department is supposed to send notification letters. And we're talking potentially 5 million borrowers in default, plus maybe another 4 million considered at high risk. It's a substantial group.
Wow. Beyond those letters, what other communication is planned?
The Department of Education is launching a communications campaign specifically aimed at borrowers in default.
Trying to reach them directly.
Yeah, sending official notices about their loan status, explaining the Treasury Offset Program, again, that mechanism for taking funds.
And pointing them towards resources.
Exactly. StudentAid.gov is the main hub. It'll have guidance, resources. You should definitely check your status there or with your loan servicer. And if you are in default, the advice is to contact the default resolution group.
So information is key, but you mentioned potential hiccups, problems.
Yeah, there are some potential complications. There's apparently a big backlog, like 1.8 million applications for income-driven repayment plans still waiting to be processed.
That could cause delays.
It could. Plus, there have been some staff cuts at the Education Department, which might impact the support available. And then there are ongoing legal challenges around some repayment plans that have even led to forced forbearance for some. It's a bit messy.
So getting help might not be instant or easy for everyone. What happens if someone just stays in default, ignores the notices?
Well, the consequences can be pretty harsh and long-lasting. Your credit report and score take a big hit.
Which affects borrowing for a house, a car.
Absolutely. You also lose eligibility for things like deferment or forbearance, or switching to other repayment plans, the wage garnishment, the offset of federal payments that can just keep happening.
And no more federal student aid if you wanted to go back to school?
Correct. You become ineligible for that too. Federal loans typically default after 270 days of missed payments, remember.
Is bankruptcy ever an option? I know it's famously difficult for student loans.
It is technically possible under something called the Brunner test, which requires proving undue hardship. It's a very high bar. And there's some indication the current administration might interpret that standard quite strictly, so it's not an easy out.
Okay, so serious consequences. But there are options, right? Let's talk about those. Income-driven repayment plans, or IDR.
Yes, IDR plans are crucial. They base your monthly payment on your income and family size, not just the loan amount.
Which can make payments much more affordable for people.
Exactly. It can drastically lower your payment, sometimes even to $0, and it helps you avoid default and garnishment. And they've been working to simplify enrollment, less paperwork.
That's good news. Like, give us a quick example.
Sure, someone earning, say, $40,000 a year with a couple of dependents might see their payment drop significantly under plans like SVE, for example.
Yeah.
Makes a real difference.
And what about that yearly income recertification? I remember that being a pain point.
Yeah, that's another positive change. They're reducing how often you need to recertify your income for IDR plans.
So fewer hoops to jump through each year?
Hopefully. The goal is to make it easier to stay enrolled and prevent people from accidentally falling out of compliance and into default because of paperwork issues.
For anyone listening who feels overwhelmed, where's the single best place to go for reliable info?
Hands down, StudentAid.gov. That's the official source from the Department of Education.
What can you find there?
Everything, really. Info on getting out of default through rehabilitation that usually involves making 9 affordable payments over 10 months. Details on loan consolidation, which can sometimes help.
All the different IDR plans explained.
Yes, descriptions of all the plans, calculators to help you estimate your payment, contact info for your specific loan servicer.
And guidance on avoiding that Treasury offset program we talked about.
Absolutely. It's all laid out there. It really should be your first stop.
Okay, StudentAid.gov. Got it. Looking ahead now, what's the bigger picture for student loan management?
Well, Federal Student Aid, or FSA, is definitely focusing on outreach, trying to connect with defaulted borrowers proactively, nudge them towards repayment or enrolling in an IDR plan before garnishment kicks in.
Along with simplifying those IDR processes we mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's also this broader theme of restoring accountability across the board.
What does that involve?
It means working with schools, loan servicers, government agencies, trying to make the whole system work better. Resuming the Treasury Offset Program is seen as part of that accountability push.
Any other potential changes on the horizon?
There are some proposed reforms, mainly from House Republicans, that might come into play after July 2026. The idea is to make colleges share some of the financial risk if their former students can't repay their federal loans.
Interesting. Holding institutions more accountable for outcomes.
That seems to be the idea, yeah. Linking funding or responsibility to things like program costs and graduate earnings.
So it really feels like there's a definite shift, putting the responsibility for repayment more squarely back on the borrower.
That's a very accurate takeaway. Secretary McMahon's messaging emphasizes individual responsibility over, say, broad government relief or taxpayer burden. It's a stricter approach than we've seen with the pauses and forgiveness talk?
But relief programs still exist for certain situations.
Yes, absolutely. For specific cases like fraud by the school, or if a borrower becomes permanently disabled, those targeted relief programs remain. But for most people, the expectation is clear. You need to manage your debt as collections restart.
Okay, so let's sum this up. Student loan garnishment is set to resume in 2025 after this long pause. The consequences, as we've discussed, can be significant, especially if you're already struggling financially.
But the key message really is that you aren't powerless. There are options.
Right. Income-driven repayment plans, looking into loan rehabilitation if you're in default, just getting clear on the timeline, these are steps you can take right now.
Absolutely. Don't wait for that garnishment notice to land. Be proactive. Go to StudentAid.gov today.
Find out exactly where you stand, explore the options that fit your situation. Taking action now is crucial to avoid those serious consequences.
It really is. It's about taking control of your financial future.
So as you listen to this, think, what questions do you still have? And maybe more importantly, what's one concrete step you'll take, maybe even today, to get a better handle on your own student loan situation using resources like StudentAid.gov? It's complex, yes, but taking that first step can make all the difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.